Can progressives win in Republican districts, in rural Republican districts? How about one that's plus 16 for Republicans? The answer isn't, yeah, they might be able to. It's, yes, they already have. And not only that, can that same person then unseat the highest Republican state holder, state office holder in their whole state? Yes, that's the same person. I got great news for you. We're gonna talk to her right now. Chloe Maxmin is currently a Maine state senator. She was also in the House. She was in fact the youngest to win a House and a Senate seat in the state of Maine. She is a progressive. There's a documentary about her called Rural Runners. She's starting a new organization called Dirt Road Organizing. Chloe, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. So Chloe, we're gonna wanna know how you won, obviously, okay? So, there's a couple of different components here. There's the fact that it's rural, there's the fact that it was the Republican districts, and then there's the issue of size. But let's start with, how did you win in such a deeply Republican area before we get into rural?
You know, I grew up in a small town in rural Maine, and I've always just loved my community so much. And as I grew older and became more involved with progressive politics, I really began to see the ways that so many of the folks in my community I didn't feel like their voices were being heard and reflected. And what's more, on the national scale, rural folks are tilting Republican. In 2009, there was almost no partisan lean amongst rural voters. And as of 2019, rural folks were going Republican by 16 points. So that's a huge shift in such a short amount of time. And I knew that was happening in my community. And I really just wanted to dive in and try and better understand what was happening.
So you decide to run for the House state seat, right? How long did it take you to run? Because I know you did a lot of door knocking. I don't know if that was the reason why you won. Tell us why you think you won and how you did it and how long it took.
I think, my amazing campaign manager and co-author Canyon Woodward and we both worked on a bunch of campaigns before. We both came from rural places. And when we took on our race in 2018, we really were just trying to think about it a little bit differently. There are so many folks doing this work in rural America, so many Democrats running for office and in conservative spaces. We're not the only ones doing this work, but we really just said, okay, we're gonna do things differently. We're not gonna use resources from the party. We're gonna try and do this ourselves. And so we did a lot of things that were just, tweaks, adjustments on how we usually campaign that made it feel so much more human. One of the biggest things that we did is we created our own canvassing universe, which is the group of people that the voters and the candidate go and talk to. And when I was talking to Republicans and independents in my district, every day I was talking to people who had never been contacted by a Democratic campaign or canvasser in their entire voting history. And you might think, oh, well, we're not talking to them because we don't have anything in common. But it was actually the exact opposite, that we were finding so much common ground. And even if it was just agreeing to disagree, even if someone didn't vote for us, we were forging these connections that feel so deeply important in this moment in history when there's so much at stake and we can't allow the divisions to grow stronger.
So do you know, I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but how many people live in your district? It's not a US congressional seat, it's a state seat. And how many people live in the Senate seat that you later won?
Good question. The House districts in Maine are quite small. It's about 9,000 people when I was running in 2018. The Senate district is slightly more comparable to what we see in other states. It's about 37,000 folks.
I got you. And in the first campaign, how long did you campaign?
In 2018, we canvassed all year long from January to November. And then we were geared up to do the same thing in 2020 when we were running for state Senate, but then COVID hit. So we stopped canvassing, and we did start canvassing again, but not until later in the summer when everyone was outside. We used our campaign to organize a large spread mutual aid effort across the district. But, I'm young, I don't have any kids. My work is flexible, so I was able to campaign throughout the year. And I know that's not accessible to everybody, but I think a lot of what Canyon and I did in our book is really just try and distill individual lessons and strategies and tactics that have worked for us in the hopes that maybe it will make others campaigning a little bit more accessible and easier.
Right. And so when you were running for the Senate seat, now that's a larger number of folks, it's 4 times as big as your House seat. You're running against the highest ranking Republican in Maine, right? So it's a much bigger challenge, and now you can't canvass. So what did you do to win that race?
In 2020, I had started canvassing, and then when COVID hit, it was inappropriate to campaign, let alone canvass. But we had access to the voter database. We have people's phone numbers, and we use that to just reach out to every single senior in our district, regardless of political affiliation, and offer help. We ended up having about 200 volunteers call over 13,500 folks and call them, make sure we delivered prescriptions. We helped connect people to food. We provided rides, whatever people needed. That's what our campaign became about for a large chunk of time. It wasn't about getting me elected, but getting folks help. And then I did start canvassing again, but it was just me. I knocked over 13,300 doors in 2020 to win.
So and with 2 what would otherwise be considered miraculous victories, right? But you're trying to point out they're not miraculous, that other people can do them as well, right? And so that's what's really interesting and important here. So when it comes to rural voters, how you're a progressive, how were you able to connect with those rural voters who at this point are more heavily Republican?
I think so much of it is that I grew up in this community, and I grew up on my family's farm. I grew up on my dad's snowmobile. I understand the community that I'm running in, and I think that's so important for anybody who's running for office. And growing up, I really don't remember politics being a hugely divisive issue. I mean, of course it came up, but the relationships that I was raised with were really focused on values. Are you a good person? Do you show up when someone is in need? And I really felt like when I started campaigning in my community that was getting lost, that it was the politics of today and these narratives that are created to divide us had become so dominant that it was very tricky just to have simple conversations with people. And so, what we did was we just went and talked with folks who thought differently than we did, and we found our common ground, and we found that space where we can respect each other and hear what each other are saying, and in that space form a meaningful relationship that isn't just the transaction of a vote, but that's based on real dialogue and mutual respect.
So were there any issues where we found agreement?
There are so many issues where I found agreement with folks, and of course there's issues where there's disagreement as well. I think I have very strong progressive values, and I strongly believe in social justice and racial justice and climate justice, and I don't bend on those in my conversations with folks. But for the most part, what I found, which I was really surprised by, is that folks on both sides of the aisle are just deeply frustrated with our political system. We feel left behind, we feel let down, we feel unheard and unrepresented. And that was a ubiquitous message that I heard. And so that was pretty interesting to me, because that's why I ran for office. And then I was talking to people who were voting for Trump, and they were saying the exact same thing. So to me, it was more about translating my values as a progressive person into this rural conservative context to see if we can make headway, because the rural vote is gaining so much power in our political system. It's tilting state legislatures to the right. It's having an enormous influence over our presidency and state level races. And if we don't invest in rural America, we are going to lose on the key issues that matter to progressives.
So that's almost certainly going to happen and continue to happen because the Democratic Party leadership doesn't care. I'm going to ask you for the advice for them. You guys wrote a book called Dirt Road Revival: How to Rebuild Rural Politics and Why Our Future Depends on It. So what is your main advice to Democratic Party leadership in recapturing rural America?
The biggest thing that Canyon and I talk about is just as simple and cheesy as it sounds, having an open heart and an open mind and really taking the time to drive down that mile-long dirt road driveway and have a conversation with someone who might not be a Democrat, and to do that over and over again, and to invest the time and the money and the resources and all of the volunteer capacity into these rural races so that we have durable political power cycle after cycle. I think that's one of the very special gifts that we had from the film Rural Runners, is just like actual footage of what it looks like and showing that it can be a kind, good experience, and just how important it is to get folks involved with rural races that oftentimes receive less attention. We have rural candidates across the country who are fighting for progressive values, and they need our support.
Chloe, what would you say to anybody, whether they're Democratic leaders, consultants, or just the regular person? Says, I hear you, but those are small districts, right? And so if we're trying to win congressional seats, but in rural areas, the congressional seats are 750,000 people. So you'll run out of time if you walk down a mile dirt road for every voter. So, and I think that's a fair question. So what do you say to those folks?
It's all connected. I think that one of the things that we talk about in the book and the film is that Democrats have had a really top-down strategy where we focus on statewide or very, very large races. And the way that we win those races is by focusing on the cities where all the Democrats are, and we just turn out as many people as we can. But then the consequence of that strategy, when you look at every other race that's happening, from planning board to school board to town council and state legislatures, they're all going the other way. So even though we may be winning some of these seats that are large congressional seats or statewide seats, we're losing the local races. The Democrats lost almost 1,000 state legislative seats during Obama's presidency. We have so much ground to make up. And what's so important these days, especially with what's happening with the Supreme Court, is that we do have strong Democratic majorities in state legislatures, because that's how we protect our civil rights, our voting rights, our reproductive rights. And if we're only focusing on urban turnout when we have the resources to invest in the state, then we're leaving behind everyone else and jeopardizing so many of these critical races. I mean, in my community, it's happening right now, and it's happening across the country, where genderqueer is trying to be banned in one of the public schools in my district, and the folks who are going to be making that decision are on the school board. So there's just examples everywhere of how important it is to be investing in these local races where the impacts on our lives are so profound.
Yep. I wish that Democratic leadership would listen to you. I am not overly confident that they will. So those same set of folks from 2009 to now have been obsessed with themselves and with money. So you've got a tough dirt road ahead of you, but I'm rooting for you. We all are. The new organization is going to be called Dirt Road Organizing. The book is called Dirt Road Revival. You're seeing a theme here. And the movie is Rural Runners. Real quick, last thing, where can people watch Rural Runners?
Rural Runners will be live on Vimeo, but you can most easily find it at dirtroadrevival.com.
All right, Chloe Maxmin, a couple of miraculous victories under her belt. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.